Welcome to the first lecture on climate change, business opportunities and challenges. This is something I've put together that really tries to ground us. I mean, obviously it's all based in climate change science, but it's a very specific set of content. It's a very specific lecture that delves into business ability to A, adapt to climate change, B, possibly identify opportunities around it with new products and services and ways to do business, and then C, assess their potential risk going into a carbon impaired future. And so hopefully those are the three things that you'll bring out of this is how do they identify the challenges, the opportunities, and their risk, and what do they do about their risk if indeed they are a company that's exposed. So we're going to be looking very specifically at CAPs, CAPs, Climate Action Plans. And you will be reading a climate action plan for the city of Missoula, or looking at one, in preparation for next Wednesday. So basically this is what I just said. Oh, and then we're also going to look at what's going on legislatively. What's happening legislatively on the regional, national, international levels. And this is, of course, the first question, and we've been discussing this all semester. Hasn't climate always been changing? Certainly it has. We see scientific proof of that. The problem is, of course, the pace or the rate at which it's changing and the inability of biodiversity to adapt quickly under such a situation. Clearly, given long periods of time, species adapt to climatic shifts. It's just the accelerated rate is too much. And then this might surprise you, but if you're running a business and I come in to talk to you about this, we don't spend very much time talking about why, right? Why is climate change? Because you can get embroiled in this, is it anthropogenic, i.e. human accelerated or not, and then you get totally diffused from the actual conversation, which is, what's your business going to do about it? What are your opportunities? What are your risks? All the things I identified earlier. So one thing I would counsel you going into businesses is you're not here to have a scientific argument or a values-based argument. You're here to assess that laundry list of items I just described. And then that takes all the emotion out of it immediately. Okay, so basically, here's my questions. And we're going to look at it as it pertains to different kinds of businesses. I encourage you as we kind of go through this, since this lecture is being delivered in Montana, to think about, Montana, Western Montana-centric industry types. What feeds our economy here in Western Montana? Tourism. What else? Okay, so let's break that down. So what are some parts of tourism that feed our economy? People come here to ski, fish, hunt, fish, raft, snowmobile. They come here to Missoula now for the arts and music, right? So there's a whole array of things. So if you go into those micro niches, are you concerned if you own a Gulf ski or snowball, right? Okay, what else feeds us here besides tourism? Not so much in Western Montana. I'd say, yeah, in the state as a whole, I couldn't even begin to guess what percentage of our GDP it is. What about agriculture? Pretty significant player. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Medical centers. Right. So as we kind of look at this, maybe even just pick a company in your head. St. Pat's or Snowball or Paws Up Resort up in Ovando. Right? And just sort of try to think about a company or a industry as I go through this. So, hey, Mr. CEO of St. Pat's or owner of Paws Up, can you identify specific risks and opportunities that you think climate change presents to your company or your industry? And which ones are very specifically unique to your industry? So if you're the CEO of St. Pat's Is early snowpack melt-off important to you? Probably not, other than it exacerbates fire danger. But it's pretty important to you if you own snowball, right? What about if you're a river raft guy? We've seen where our fisheries have been closed the whole month of August because the fish are so stressed from increased water temperatures, right? So there's some that's very easy to see direct and tangible applicability, and some that, every single thing isn't going to pertain to them. Do you have any implications as far as risks and opportunities, particularly risks, with your company as pertains to your supply chain? What am I talking about? What would be risks to my supply chain if I'm at St. Pat's? What do you suppose, what kind of trucks back up every single day at the loading dock at a major medical facility? What are they unloading?
Pharmaceuticals?
Yeah, pharmaceuticals, clearly.
Supplies,
medical supplies, clearly. Food, power, pretty much anything you can imagine is probably backing up to the loading docks behind St. Pat's each and every day. Supply chain risk says, where do each of those things come from? And are those areas in particular peril? The example I have up here, in 2011, there was major flooding throughout Thailand. And all of these organizations up here got subcomponents or raw materials out of that port in Thailand. Production shut down essentially. That's a risk. Supply chain risk is a pretty big deal. That's not going to be a big deal for a resort in western Montana. They could probably find an alternative source for many of their kinds of incoming raw materials. But certainly not if you're reliant, for example, on ports in Bangladesh, which by really all projections, the country of Bangladesh isn't going to exist in 20 years. Flooding, fires, hurricanes. Where are my products coming from, that raw materials coming from that I need to make my products? That's supply chain risk. And what can I possibly do to mitigate that? I'm probably going to have to go back to the table and look at my distribution logistics through the eyes of climate change maps. That's a lot of big words. What am I talking about? Distribution logistics through the eyes, vetting it through the eyes of a climate change maps.
Well, assessing the risks on the places that you're currently getting your sources from, and then trying to figure out if there's better places to get those resources.
Absolutely. That's just one of the students in the classroom responded absolutely adequately, which is distribution logistics is going back and saying, gosh, if I'm reliant on this particular submaterial that only comes out of New Orleans, and the risk of flooding and extreme hurricanes is accelerating year by year by year, might I not want to find another supplier or another port or another option to move that product to me? Okay, it's much easier said than done, obviously. But it's just the point of starting to think about this. Like, do I just want to wake up and not be able to get one of my key raw materials, or am I going to be prepared for that? Other questions for business, and again, a lot of this it seems like kind of big words, but it's what are the policy modalities, and how are they going to impact your industry sector? A policy modality is a fancy word for basically laws that are being considered. What lawmakers are talking about shifting anything really that is going to impact your business or your industry sector surrounding climate change accelerated issues. For example, if you own a string of golf courses or retirement homes in Arizona, what policy modality are you really concerned with?
Water rights.
Water rights. Oh my goodness, I'm super concerned with who's talking about water law and water rights. Because I can't really operate a retirement village where everybody wants to break green grass in the middle of the desert, or golf courses. And I mean, it's shocking, you guys. You go to Arizona and I mean, everything's low flow toilets and nobody's got green lawns, and then there's golf courses everywhere spewing, water fountains, and I mean, it's just the most ludicrous thing you've ever seen.
Like in California, they're still putting golf courses and wineries up.
I mean,
Like,
it's
that's
these water-intensive industries. It's like, are you nuts?
One of the worst too is Las Vegas.
Oh.
Like they still water from all of the surrounding areas.
Yeah.
So that the Bellagio can have a
Fountain,
show.
Yeah. No, it's so off the charts as far as any sort of logic. So it's pretty important that you identify what's going on in the policy world around your industry sector or business. And from those proceeding to analysis, there's probably going to be a lot of conversations about realigning partnerships. What does, maybe I don't have green grass in my retirement villages, maybe I'm realigning my partnerships with professional xeriscapers, and I'm doing desert landscaping. I mean, that's a pretty easy example. They're usually quite a bit more complex than that. But it's about examining your, where do I get my capital, who's my legal affiliation, what are my distribution channels, and really thinking on a macro level about realigning the way that you do business in a carbon impaired economy. What does it look like when carbon's taxed? What's that going to do to the cost structure of my product? What does it look like when the cost of fuel doubles or triples? Because we know that we're very vulnerable, obviously, to international markets. I mean, the Saudis pull their oil off the market, the global market for a week. What happens to gas prices, right? So you kind of you have to have backup plans for these sorts of things. Okay, continuing on primary questions. What are your investors asking about your climate change exposure? What have we learned so far this semester about investors and their querying of executive management and boards? Anybody remember anything we talked about with that?
We have a lot of pull.
They do have a lot of pull. And what are even small shareholders doing now? Do small shareholders have power?
They're getting together and creating change they want to see. What were
This is
those called again?
They're called activist shareholders.
But the many things that they're doing.
Oh, proxies.
Yeah.
Proxies. Is that the word you're looking for?
No, they're like coming together and they're doing not micro, but like mini lawsuits kind of.
I mean, I call them activist shareholder lawsuits, and they're forcing proxies. They're forcing votes. They're forcing the companies that they own to act in their best interest. And it's not in my best interest if I own 0.0003% of Exxon. It's not in my best interest that they're doing no research and development around renewables. That's not going to benefit me as a shareholder. So basically, the long and the short of it is that shareholders and also institutional investors, do you remember what those are? The really huge, ginormous pools of money, like public employee retirement systems and huge faith-based, faith churches, essentially, church foundations. They're coming to companies and going, we want to see your climate action plan. Certainly I want to see your product development plan, and certainly I want to see your branding and marketing strategy, but on top of all that, I want to see your climate action plan. And it's an actual document that identifies, and we're going to go through this list of different kinds of risk, and I want to know what you're doing as a company to plan very specifically for these different kinds of risk. And then I want to know about your innovation. Right? We talked about that in the 6 steps, the business case for sustainability. The first one was enhance revenue through innovation. Do you have a way to stay nimble? in innovating new products to merge or to shift, to transition into this low carbon economy. So for example, if I'm a utility company, do you have plans to capitalize and put up a smart grid? What's a smart grid? Anyone heard that term? You know how we all have chips and everything in our homes now? I mean, I don't, but lots of people have refrigerators with chips in them, and the coffee maker has a chip, and the heated dog water bowl has a chip. All those things are talking to the electrical grid and pulling electricity from the grid in the times where there's low loads on the grid. So all of us get up in the morning, we shower between 7 and 8, we throw in a load of laundry, and we, That's not efficient. That's not an efficient use of the grid. An efficient use of the grid is the middle of the night our wash machine should kick on when nobody else is using it, right? So that a smart grid manages electricity and disperses it and talks to your household to manage everything at the most highly level of efficiency. So, I mean, that's a big example of innovation strategies. But, just smaller things, all the stuff we've talked about. What are you doing to reduce your materials, your water, your waste, your energy? So these are all questions that go into the Climate Action Plan. And then lastly, and we haven't spent a whole ton of time on this because this is a business class, but what exactly is this going to do to your financial statement? And for those of you that are accounting majors, what are our big financial statements again?
Income, balance.
Income statement, which is a profit and loss statement.
Balance statement.
Balance sheet, yep, which is assets, liabilities, and equity. And then there's one more you maybe haven't talked about too terrible much. Statement of cash flows, cash in, cash out. Okay. I can guarantee you that when, particularly for a publicly traded company, but really, yeah, primarily for publicly traded, you live and die in the stock market. Your price is valued based upon the financial statements that you report. And so any of this, the next question is, what does this do to your balance sheet, your P&L? Okay? And we've looked at a lot of this already. This really kind of just interlaces with the 6 business cases, right? Is it going to increase your revenue through nimble, new, flexible production or products and innovation around that? Is it going to reduce your expenses through reducing the amount of water and materials and energy and water that you use? How are you going to measure, and this isn't an issue right now in America, but it is an issue if you're a global company and do business in Europe or Japan, but carbon is priced in some places. What does that mean when I tell you carbon is priced? It is, but do you pay for every ton of carbon you use? You don't. We don't. We don't have a price on carbon here. If we did, you'd get an electric bill, and there'd be a surcharge that would show you used 780 kilowatts last month, and I used 1,326, and we're each going to pay a tax based upon the carbon that's captured in those kilowatt hours. And every time we go to fill up our car, there's going to be a carbon tax associated with the emissions that we're going to put off. Okay? We don't have a carbon tax in America. It's completely an unpalatable idea. We're very tax averse in this country. But carbon is priced in many countries. And if you do business there, that's part of your cost of your product, isn't it? You've got to absorb that and somehow pass that on to your customers. So what does your business look like if there is a carbon tax, right? And if you're super carbon intensive, right? Like I sell, I make something very, let's say I'm a concrete mixer. We learned from at Clearwater that concrete, something like, what did he say? What percentage of annual emissions is concrete?
In the world?
Yeah, it was huge.
Like 10%.
10% or something. It was an insane number for one industry.
Yeah.
So if you produce concrete for a living, and there's the thought of carbon taxes down the road, might you be thinking about some alternative product lines to complement carbon, like he was talking about, the coal ash? And then also on the balance sheet, what does this mean? You guys should know this now. reclassifying, having new categories of assets on your balance sheet, lead versus non-lead. What does that mean? Do you remember what lead is?
Leaders in energy and environmental design.
Leadership in environmental and energy design, and it's a designation for a what? What did they stamp it on? Did they stamp it on my purse? No, buildings, right? Buildings. And there's all sorts of different kinds. Residential lead, commercial lead, remodeling lead, neighborhood lead, right? So why would we maybe be looking in the future and looking at a balance sheet where assets are classified as lead assets versus non-lead assets? Why would that be important for an investor to see? Any ideas? Which ones are higher risk?
Non-lead.
The non-lead. Again, as we move into the future, do you want something that doesn't have a tight building envelope and isn't water-wise, and so it's, maybe I'm getting a little bit too much into the weeds here, but it's about thinking through all aspects of your business through this additional set of, this additional lens. It's vetting everything through climate change models. This is a picture. Anybody know what this picture's of? Ever seen that? It's Rio de Janeiro, and that's, I can't remember how to say it in Brazilian. I think it's Sucre de Pan, Sugarloaf Mountain, essentially. And all the issues that they're having with sea level rise, increasing population coming from rural Brazil into Rio. It's a city. Sao Paulo's like 15 million people, and Rio's like 9 million people. And how are they looking at literally running this major metropolitan area with all these new climate change imposed restrictions? The unfortunate thing is the president of Brazil right now is basically doing exactly what's happening in our country, which is degrading all the environmental laws, pulling out of the Paris Climate Accords, and encouraging deforestation. So,
He just stepped down.
huh?
Did he just step
Did
down?
he just step down?
Wasn't he just elected though?
He was just elected. I think you're thinking of Bolivia.
Oh, I am.
think you're thinking of Bolivia.
I am, sorry.
It was this year. What, can I look him up?
Sure, please. He's got like a four names in his name. While you're doing that, I'm going to keep going. So, management disclosure. What's management going to talk about now? Well, we've been looking at sustainability reports. Tell us what your emission targets are. Tell us does anyone know what the word contingency means?
Like a backup plan?
Yeah, what are the possibilities of what might happen in a carbon constrained future to your business, your city, your product line, right? And lastly, this is the last of the first series of primary questions for business. Are you poised to issue sustainability reports? We've just spent the last unit looking at those. As we know, they're not mandatory in the United States. They are mandatory in the EU. If you're publicly traded on a European Union exchange, you have to issue sustainability reports. But if you don't even know what one is, you should probably be taking a peek, if you're a publicly traded company, and saying, how do I maybe start this process of stakeholder engagement planning? Okay, and do I have internal expertise, or do I need to call in consultants, et cetera, et cetera? So as you can see from these last, what were those, 3 slides? Yeah, 3 slides. That's a hell of a lot of new things. Not new necessarily, but additional things for a business that's already thinking about how do I stay one step ahead of the competitor, and how do I hire the best people, and how do I market my product, and how, da-da-da-da-da. This is sort of like on top of that, and yet really, really intertwined with the conversation. So where the heck do I start to answer these questions is the question. And a formal risk assessment is the jumping off point. If you have, and I'm making a pretty big statement here that may or may not be true, but my gut feel is that it's true, is that anybody that works in the insurance world now will tell you the number one thing, number one issue that's pushing their boundaries are climate change related health claims, climate change related property damage claims, right? Do you want to be the guy that's insuring the Gulf Coast, right? Fire, can you imagine the fire claims that have been happening in Northern California the last couple of years? So property, health.
They're already putting those off. I just saw a thing on nightly news about how basically they've cut off a lot of the California.
Yeah, it's uninsurable.
Yeah.
It's uninsurable.
Yeah, so you can pay like $16,000 a month or a year, whatever it was.
It's an insane amount.
Exorbitant rates.
Yeah. Because
And there are people that have been, with the same company for 30 years, and now they got notices, which conveniently, those notices came out after they had paid their premiums all year up until fire season, and then they got canceled, and they can re-up, but it's for these outrageous premiums.
And
So it's already...
They're doing that on the Gold Coast too, or they're going to. I read an article about it last year.
And then what do? And then you can't sell your house.
Right, so for those of you that are listening, there's a really great conversation about what's happening to property insurance. And we're only talking about within the United States, but I have to assume that the conversation is going on globally. I mean, we've already lost 2 island countries completely. I mean, they're just gone, the people are displaced. So is this issue of I own property, residential or commercial, whatever, in Northern California, and my premiums, my property premiums have been $2,000 a month forever, and now they have jumped to $9,000 a month. And I mean, it's just simply a number I can't make, and I'm no longer insured. Or same if I've got property on Key West or Gulfport, Mississippi, right? I'm uninsurable. And what that does, talk about risk, what that does to for property's ability to change title. What does that actually mean? So say you own a commercial building in Napa Valley, right? And your premiums, you own it outright, right? So you're not required per se to have insurance by the mortgage company. You own it outright, and your premiums have just gone from $2,000 to $9,000 a month, and you can't pass on that much rent increase to your commercial tenants. Okay? So now what happens? Your policy lapses, right? You simply can't pay it. So obviously 2 things are potentially talk about risk. One is the risk of actual burning down your commercial building and now you don't own it anymore. The second is it limits how you can pass title to that building down the road. Who can buy it? Only somebody that what?
Has cash.
Yes, has cash. Because nobody's going to be able to get a mortgage that's got a $9,000 a month insurance premium built into it. So do you see what it does to the ability to fluidly move real estate across different owners? It's a pretty big deal. It's a pretty big deal. It's like if I couldn't get, one of our best friends lives at the end of Tower Road. And if you've been here a couple of years and seen the flood cycles down there, that's exactly the problem they have.
Yeah.
Their flood insurance, they're just a personal residence, they don't own a business, but their flood insurance is so exorbitant that it would take up, a third of their monthly budget. So they're without flood insurance in a floodplain, where for 2 out of the last 4 years they've worked around the clock for up to 30, 40 days to save their property, right? Talk about selling it. Who's going to buy that property?
Well, it sounds like Missoula County now.
Yeah, well,
Also,
that's going to happen. But
No, I just saw the feed.
it's really horrible for the people that are already living there, that
Yeah.
already have property there,
Yeah.
but it will keep people from building there in the future.
right,
You know,
which is
so-
a really valid point, also being addressed. The comment is that, yeah, it sucks if you've already got the commercial building in Napa or the property on the river in Missoula, Montana, but it will dissuade people from building in these areas that are high risk in the future. In North Carolina, we know that they have a very pro-development governor who is still building, advocating for zoning laws where you're building right up to the seawalls. And it's like, I mean, A, what developer is going to take on that risk? And B, who the heck's going to buy a condo? I mean, it's just crazy making. So this is all part of the risk assessment. Okay, very broadly, and we've talked about this. This looks just like what we did with sustainability reporting. You need to get executive support. You need to form a steering committee. You need to identify your stakeholders. So obviously, climate change risk mitigation planning and climate action planning is deeply tied into sustainability reporting. I mean, the overlap should be very great between who's doing the planning for both of these activities. And of course, we know to determine, what's GHG again? Greenhouse gases, to do our greenhouse gas footprint. And here's our protocol that we know that's the international protocol that's widely accepted. So that's all part of your climate action planning as well. And then honestly, just like any of us plan anything in our life, it's like, what do I want to do in the short term? What do I want to do in the midterm? And what are my long-range goals? And then how the heck am I going to get there? Anybody remember the term that we used when we were studying the natural stuff? Where you try and figure out what you want to look like in the future?
Backcasting.
Backcasting. Yeah, backcasting, where instead of forecasting like I'm incrementally going to change what I'm doing today, you envision what you want. By 2050, we want to live in a community where there's no waste. We have water catchment and recycling systems. We're on renewable energy, and there's only 5% of trips are taken in single passenger vehicles. Okay, that's what we want our community to look like by 2050. Okay, how are we going to get there? It's that kind of ambitious stuff that everyone says, oh, that's impossible. It's like, how can you get somewhere, somewhere that's really progressive if you can't envision it, okay? So, and then this last bullet is something that I've done some personal research on that I'm really excited about, or I think it's a powerful tool, and it just threads in with the very basest of human desires, which is tie your executives' bonuses to reaching carbon goals, and guess what's going to change? Carbon. Right now, how do we incentivize our executives? I just saw the principal of Bear Stearns, which is a ginormous investment house in New York, was on Meet the Press on Sunday night. I love that show. And his bonus last year was $30 million. And how is he incentivized? He's incentivized by profit. How much profit does your investment house make? What if, not all of it, because that would never pass the board, but how about if 10% of his $30 million was tied to climate reduction strategies? Or investing in companies that were progressive as far as climate impact, right? So, and this has happened. There's not a ton of examples of this. Again, it's more common in the EU. But tie part of your package to these aggressive climate goals, and you're going to see companies expending resources to do this much more rapidly. It's the old basic same thing as like, I used to write a column for the Missoulian for years, and it was super fun. I did it for probably 5 years, and most of it was on sustainability, but also some of it was on my travels. And I took this trip, a car trip, truck trip actually, to Northern California, and I wrote about trying to have a carbon-free, waste-free road trip in America. And the first place that I went, well, your first question should be what? How could I have a carbon-free trip driving an F-150, right? What can you do?
Offset.
Offset. I had to buy offsets. I had to purchase offsets. I had to plant trees to absorb the carbon that my truck was emitting.
How much were the offsets to get to California? Do you remember?
Dollar-wise?
Yeah. Let's say if I went on a road trip this summer to California.
I would tell you, this was a number of years ago. This was probably, gosh, my son was in college, probably 7 or 8 years ago. $50 each way.
Oh, that's not bad.
$50 each way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So the first night I spent in Bend, Oregon, and this is, I am going to tie this into this. I spent in Bend, Oregon, and the first thing you realize when you walk out of your room in Bend, Oregon is that it's, they've got little tiny garbage cans outside their homes that they pay dearly to get emptied, and then huge recycling bins that are all free. So you're disincentivized to produce garbage. In here in Missoula, we pay for recycling, well, we pay for both, but you know you've got to generate some garbage, and they don't give you any change on the garbage based upon the volume you output every week. Like, I mean, I called my garbage provider and said, I don't fill one of my bins in a month. Just come pick up every 5-6 weeks at my house. We compost and recycle. And he said, oh no, you can't do that. You've got to pick up every week. And I'm like, why? And the answer was actually valid, that a lot of people try to save money, and then there's health issues because, you know, for obvious reasons. But the point being is, you have to incentivize people. You can't just punish them. If we incentivized our executives to do this, I think we would see some movement on carbon footprint reduction. So the last thing I'd like to do before we break today is this, assuming Western Montana. And I'd like you to just jot down what you think, and we've talked about some of these, some different risks are. If you are a honeybee curator, or a highline wheat farmer, or a canola farmer in Western Montana, what do you feel some of the potential risks from climate change are? If you are an insurance executive, what do you think some potential risks are? And if you, what do you manage? You manage the, let's see. Maybe you own you're a shareholder in the company that owns the franchise for Glacier and Yellowstone and all the national parks where they've got the, what's that called? They do all the food and beverage concessions. They own the concessions franchise. So just pretend you're those 3 people, right? Or that's your company. And I'm just going to give you a couple minutes to jot down what you think some potential risks are. I'm going to shut down the slideshow while I do that, and we will pick back up with the second lecture on this in the second lecture. Thank you for listening.